So we are starting today with a German children's story. So once upon a time, there was a very naughty schoolboy named Johann Dinkeldorf, and he rose, skipped school, and drank AeroPress coffee with the older boys. One day, he was walking home from school, and he heard some mysterious organ music from a thatched cottage, and when he approached, he saw 3 delicious strudels sitting on a windowsill. Being as gluttonous as he was slothful, he grabbed the strudels, when suddenly, an old lady appeared at the door. "For each strudel you eat," she said, "your grandson will be cursed to do 1 podcast episode on Emerson, Lake and Palmer." "Okay, boomer," snorted the impudent youth and shoved a strudel into his mouth. "Self-titled debut," she cackled. But these words meant nothing to him, so he stuffed another in. "Trilogy," she said. Without even turning away from her gaze, he shoved the 3rd one in, and as he left, he could hear the 7 organs playing at once, though he could swear there was but one old lady. Later that year, he moved to the new country and changed his last name from Dinkeldorf to Gann. And so today, I'm here with Brian Gann, and we are doing brain salad surgery. Welcome back, my prog geeks, to the show that's once a week. I am your host, Ian Prize, and today we are doing brain salad surgery. So we have arrived at the height of first-generation prog. We are in the mid-70s, and the bands are going towards their final forms. So Genesis will go into their full theatrical rock opera, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway, which I dislike and we're not going to talk about. Pink Floyd grapple with fame after their enormous success of Dark Side of the Moon in Wish You Were Here, which we'll talk about in a few weeks. Jethro Tull go back to their folk source, peaking with Song from the Woods, which I'll get to in a very special episode. Yes asked what is better than Close to the Edge, and came up with the answer 4 closest to the edges, and we will talk about Tales from Topographic Oceans next week. And King Crimson goes into their final jazz metal form, which we have been waiting for, and we'll start with that with Lark's Tongue and Aspic in 2 weeks' time. But this week, we talk about ELP's final form, which is more organs, more synth, more drums, more Greg, and that leads us to brain salad surgery. So when we last left ELP, we had just finished their delightful album Trilogy. It was a great studio album. However, when they took it on tour, they found it very hard to reproduce all of the overdubs. So they sensibly bought a theater to rehearse a new album, which would become Brain Salad Surgery. In but 6 weeks, they blasted it out, adorned it with the iconic H.R. Giger cover, and went on to do their most massive, spectacular tour yet. So in many ways, whilst Trilogy is more accessible, this album is more ELP, which is good, bad, and everything in between. And it would also be plagued by the question that would hang over this entire period. Are these albums mighty phoenixes rising from the flames or massive dumpster fires? So, with me to discuss these albums today are Rufus Daw.
Hiya.
Ed Thomas.
Hello.
And Brian Gann. Hello, everyone. Brian, I guess we are going to start with you. What are your first thoughts on brain salad surgery?
Well, I heard you use the term jump the shark, and I don't know if I'd quite go that far, but I think it amplifies the things I like about Trilogy and their earlier work, but then things I don't like get worse.
Yeah, this is an extreme album, as you're right, on both ends.
Yeah.
Rufus, how did you feel about brain salad surgery?
Oh.
Excellent. All right, starting at the top there. Well, again, let's see if I can convince you by the end.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Christ, this was hard to take in.
All right,
Yeah.
we'll get into it then.
Yeah.
Ed, how did you get on with brain salad surgery?
I put my headphones on and I dove in there and just absorbed it. I took it for what it was, and it was lots of things. It was lots of things. And I'm sure it's lots of things to different people, but to me, it was just lots of things. And there's stuff on this I really quite enjoyed. There's stuff on this that I just thought was oddly choiced. It is a strange album. It does take you to some strange places. There's some gems in there, and I think it's if this is not your normal cup of tea, then I'd say it's still worth enduring for some of them gems. I just find it all very interesting, regardless.
Yeah.
I like hearing where the technology goes at this period in was it 73?
Yeah.
There's some new equipment that we've not heard before and anything before, which we'll talk about, but ultimately it was an experience.
Yeah.
So obviously, we've gone over a lot of prog albums by this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for the majority, certainly in the ones that I've been involved in, I've been able to figure out who the album is for, right?
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
I don't know who this album is for.
Yeah. I guess in so much as it's not rocky enough to be a rock album, not jazzy enough to be a jazz album,
mm-hmm.
and that's why it's a prog album. No, but I think that is I think as I was kind of referencing at the beginning, this is the stage where prog goes full prog, and that pretty much lost everyone at some point. So yeah, I think this is their most proggy album, and that's as Ed said, a lot of things to a lot of people.
Yeah.
One thing I would say is that each member of the band is really making their own presence heard in a way that's unique to them, rather than this is the sound of this particular band. It's like, this is the sound of Emerson. This is this is Greg now. Yeah. This is Carl now. It's like, I think what happens is the reason I feel most positive towards some songs and others is because I'm like, oh, I think I prefer this person to this person, or I prefer their approach. Because I think the one thing that does sum it all up is it's excessive. Yeah, I would say, when I listen, producer ears on, I all the way through it, I'm thinking I want to hear more of the drums. Like, the drums are always impressive and they're always beautifully recorded, and I like. It's like they've kind of put the drummer in the shadows for some reason. Sure. Like he's not exciting enough or something. And I feel like that's a weird ego that's done that, because that's some of the best stuff on the album. He's
a really good drummer. Yeah. It's funny, these are themes that we touched on with Debut a lot as well. This idea of individual talent and sort of excess. I think I called it wankery. And it's a bit after we did Debut, I didn't go on and listen to the later albums of ELP because, well, I didn't really like Debut. But it's almost a shame that they didn't change, because there's a reasonable period of time here between Debut and then we've gone through Trilogy, and now they're at Brain Salad Surgery. You would think there would be a degree of growth, and inevitably when I listened through it felt like I was listening to an extension of Debut.
So it's interesting because I actually hear a ton of growth from the Debut, but I guess growth like a horrible fungus that's been spreading or something. As in, I can hear that it gotten more intricate, more weird, and more grand. Yeah. Because I feel like, again, this is for massive virtuosos. The Debut felt like a bunch of cute demo tapes. This feels like the real deal. Yeah. Take that as you will.
I see what you're saying, for sure. I guess what I'm not really giving benefit of the doubt to is that this is their intrinsic style. Maybe that's something I'm not really appreciating. Yeah. And then of course they're not going to get rid of that, because that's what makes them ELP. So I guess that's something I just have to grapple with over time.
Something you had talked about in the Debut is that this is, maybe this is just what Keith Emerson wanted to give to the world. Yeah. There is definitely not a more accessible ELP. Yeah. Like, if you took that away from them, they're not ELP.
Yeah, exactly.
And so this is you get on this prog journey and you get off the train.
This is, you take it or leave it.
Because I do know they went on tour for this album, but was it as grandiose as previous ones?
Yeah, so this is the grandiose tour. This is the one with the rotating piano. This is the one with the 3 trucks. Like, this is the one everyone thinks of when they think of ELP's monster tours.
It would be pretty wild to see this live. Like, just to see it, just to see the supposed pretentiousness and grandioseness, grandeur? Whatever.
Grandiosity.
Grandeur.
Yeah.
Would just be a sight to behold.
So I feel like if I could be up close and actually see them do stuff, like see Keith Emerson jump around on his organ and stuff, I'd love to see that. And I was like, okay, if you give me exactly 1 time pass, I'll probably see yes. But if you give me a second time pass, I think this is, even though they're not my favorite recorded band, I'd say they're probably the second band I'd most want to see live. Because I think, again, with ELP, I imagine you would get even more from them live on definitely the 1973 tour.
Yeah.
The only tour I want to see more is Tales from Topographic Oceans, because that had the Roger Dean stage design.
Oh, right.
And so that's the only tour of like the classic prog era I think I want to see even more.
So I'm looking into this now. So I heard about the rotating piano. I thought it was moving in a circle, or it, this is so hard to describe.
Horizontally.
Horizontally. Yeah. I didn't realize he was like flipping. That is fucking wild. Wow.
To bring this home visually, Keith Emerson is strapped into the piano, going forward over the piano. Yeah. This is that tour.
Wow. Okay. You might have won. You might have just won me over. Well, we've got new goals now. Yep. Time machine.
If someone, we don't want to kill Hitler. We just want to see Keith Emerson play piano upside down.
If this is why we need more Patreon subscribers to fund this venture.
Fund our adventure. Our totally legit time traveling. Okay, fabulous.
But it's definitely Keith Emerson, I think, is the prog wizard.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
That makes this uber prog. If we talk about growth, I think one thing I'm hearing on this album is Greg Lake actually moving towards a more commercial aspect.
Yeah.
His guitar playing is actually pretty good on this, and you're not used to hearing a lot of that. His bass sound, I think, works really well with Emerson because it's quite piano-like. And there's a couple of examples where they do their thing, where they lock in together, and it's a great sound. But I think when he plays guitar on this album, it's like he kind of takes the baton off Keith, who is taking you somewhere uncomfortable and bringing you into a more 70s place.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I feel like I can hear the main influence on this. It's like The Who, Roger Daltrey. Yeah. I'm hearing that a lot, and I'm feeling like I've heard that quite a lot with a few prog bands from this period. I didn't realise The Who was so an important part of what a lot of the prog bands were listening to. I never would have thought that Genesis would be into The Who, and they really are. And like the equipment's the same. Like you can hear some of the same tones, and it strikes me as interesting. But then when you see Greg playing live with his shirt open and stuff, you're like, yeah, you want to be Daltrey.
Oh yeah,
you want to be on the Daltrey train, not on the prog train. I think that's the redeeming feature of this album. I think is when he's taking that baton, and he really does have some good guitar chops on this that I don't think we've heard much of it all.
No,
when I really think about it, and it's done with these big 70s high watts again, like The Who. Like you hear with Jethro Tull, you hear with Genesis, like it's the staple of 70s rock, I think. The big, clean but crunchy guitar. Some of his guitar playing on this has been some of the best I've heard on any of... But you don't hear enough of it, I don't think.
No. I don't think you could really add in too much of it. Like already this pot is boiling over.
Yeah, I feel it does bring it back to some kind of level of balance. Somehow.
Yeah.
When things are getting really... What's the word?
Yeah.
Off the rails.
Kind of track. Off the rails.
Things have gone somewhere in the keyboard land. He does regain some of the balance. But then in the keyboard world, this is the first time you ever hear polyphonic synthesizers. Ever.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. That's really interesting.
And polyphonic, for those at home?
More than one
fawn.
So basically all the synthesizers up to this point, they take the note and they do electronics, oscillations and stuff, but it's only applied
one note at a time. Yep.
Yeah, and it's like you can have multiple oscillators going now. Hence why this album sounds
crazy.
Yeah.
crazy. You know, at the time, it would have just sounded interesting and futuristic. To us now, probably a little bit dated and a bit cheesy.
I mean, I was going to say, I think my first defense of many of this album is I think the soundscapes are incredible. Like, I really do think that it captures a very metallic, future, creepy feeling. You know, and I can definitely hear some of the synths might sound pretty dated, but I actually think, for me, if not pleasant and comfortable, it still sounds fresh.
It's brand new. Let's be honest here, this is 1973. So, well, yeah, of course it's going to sound dated. You know, people are like using this new stuff to the maximum because it's new and it's exciting to them.
And this is the maximum.
Yeah. So, obviously, listening to it now in 2023...
Yeah.
50 years later.
Exactly. This isn't futuristic anymore, is it?
But gosh,
we've heard
I
people,
still love it.
We've heard people really playing with this stuff since. Imagine hearing this when this came out. It must have been pretty
Wild.
interesting. Yeah. So give them that.
So I guess we'll start today with the title of this album, Brain Salad Surgery. This album's title comes from Dr. John's song Right Place, Wrong Time, which said, I just need a little brain salad surgery, got to cure this insecurity. Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So this is a colloquialism, apparently, for fellatio. And it's just like, come on, guys. And I think the interesting thing about this is that I think it's actually a really lofty, ambitious project, and it makes me sad that they just put a joke. Like, this feels very Caravan-esque. Yeah. It's just a joke. I think there's a place for, you know, as you're saying, Greg Lake buttoning his top down, whatever, being a sexy guy. And it's like, that's fine. But I was like, don't joke.
So the other night, I was telling a friend I was, recording my podcast, and I was doing it on brain salad surgery. And it's one of those things I realized, like, I don't like saying it out loud.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think because... Again, the cover is so awesome and feels so heavy. Like, it feels so, you know. But then I don't know what they would have called it otherwise. Because they've called it self-titled debut, Tarkus, trilogy. I don't know what I would have picked out of this album. I actually feel like if they had called it Jerusalem, that would have been pretty badass. I don't know what it would have meant, but it's a great name. And then it's a powerful whatever. I think when it's like, haha, it's like a blowjob slang. Teehee.
This might be embarrassing, but I actually didn't know that. And maybe it's because of the album cover. Yeah. I thought it was more like your mind is being warped by...
Well, that's what I've chosen to believe it is. I don't know whose slang brain salad surgery is as well. I've chosen it to be that, where it's some sort of... Well, not deeper, some sort of more metaphysical title.
Well, we can go with that. We can make our own reality.
Okay. So stupid.
I'm all for people not taking themselves too seriously. You know, like when someone takes their music very seriously, but they haven't taken themselves seriously, I find myself endearing to it. But I feel like nothing's been taken seriously.
Yeah.
Not one thing. But like you say, if you pair that title with the album cover, you know, I didn't
know the background.
Silly route. I thought it was something more enigmatic somehow.
It's a little glory hole, isn't it? It's an H.R. Geiger glory hole.
Jesus Christ!
You're never going to be able to unsee that.
Shall we come to the album cover then?
Wow. You know, I just didn't go there, and now I'm there. You know. Thank you, Rufus.
My apologies.
To be fair, I think H.R. Giger saved them with his album cover. So, this album cover, obviously, is one of the most striking prog ever produced. So the story behind it is Keith Emerson got taken to H.R. Giger's house when they were in Switzerland, and he went into the house and, of course, saw all of the H.R. Giger craziness. So H.R. Giger famously would go on to do Alien, but his style has always been this. A bit of insect goodness, a little bit of, like, kind of cyberpunk whatever, a little bit of gross exoskeletons, and then some genitals.
I love the cover. I love Giger. I I don't know why. I mean, I think they say art should make you feel something, and I think his work makes me feel something. Maybe it's uncomfortable or grim, but there's nothing else like it. The sort of Lovecraftian evil, like it just, everything looks wrong. And listeners, if you haven't seen Giger's work, well, obviously you start with the album cover, but just put H.R. Giger into Google, turn off safe search, and let your eyes be blown up.
Let the robotic penises flow. No, I was going to say, I think you're right that H.R. Giger makes you feel a sense of unease. And it's funny because up until this point, ELP went with The Dove because some 18-year-old had painted it. Tarkus, which some guy drew with like colored pencil. Pictures at an exhibition, which was pictures. And then Trilogy, which is just a picture of them. And so far, they haven't had much intention with their album covers. They've just been like, that's pretty cool. Technically, I think they probably did the same thing with this, but it feels so much more intentional, especially since the back half of this album is about an evil computer, kind of. And so I associate this album cover with the music in the way perhaps I don't with their other albums.
I think this is Giger's first probably real big public piece of work. Because, I mean, obviously, he very, very famously did the Alien design, but that was 6 years later. This is 73. Yep. And just looking through kind of where his work showed up, album covers, films, I think this is maybe his first big, maybe the world's introduction to his work, at least on a broad sense.
Yeah. I mean, because I think they were meeting, they met him as he was like some cool, quirky artist in Zurich, not H.R. Giger. And then, he's going to get into like crazy mechano-erotic structures. And he has a cafe in Switzerland, does he not?
It's like a bar, yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
But to be fair, like, when you're talking about the sexual connotation, like there's a lot of like sexual connotations in his
work. Yeah.
Yeah.
So H.R. Giger is a lot of kind of like weird humans breeding with robots type of stuff. Like he's always been doing that and always did do that. So Giger said about the title, the obvious thing was to combine penis, lips, and skulls, hence brain salad surgery. However, this album cover, so the penis has been airbrushed out and the model is H.R. Giger's wife. It actually, again, it's almost more high concept than the actual album is, because there's like there is something in like in a extreme art type of way. It is like, okay, I like robots, sexiness. I don't know. There's something going on in there. Brain salad surgery. I'll chalk that up to like some futuristic phrase.
That style he has, like that's his signature.
Yeah.
Style that sums up his whole career. So of course, there's more depth to that than anything on this album.
Oh.
So we come then to Jerusalem. So Jerusalem was originally a poem by the 18th century English mystic William Blake, lamenting the loss of England's green and pleasant land under the Industrial Revolution's dark satanic mills. So it uses all sorts of religious and mystical imagery that William Blake was wont to do. Then, in 1916, in World War I, it was reworked into an English patriotic hymn by Hubert Parry. And if you were thinking that all we needed to add to these mystical lyrics and bombastic orchestral anthem was Greg Lake and some sweet drum fills, you'd be entirely right. This song is superb. For me, Jerusalem is very much a glove meets hand moment. So Greg Lake said that they wanted to introduce this album in a very English manner, and I believe they succeeded. So here we are, Jerusalem.
This is either second or third favorite ELP song for me. Absolutely love it. And maybe I don't have any right to say this as an American, but it's my version of Jerusalem. When I think of, patriotic English or British songs, I think of their version.
Yeah.
I will say, and this pains me to say it as an American, but the Brits really do have the best, anthems. Like this, Rule Britannia, they're all banging.
We Will Rock You.
I would love to see an ELP cover album of just patriotic anthems. I think that would be pretty good.
Songs. Yeah.
I have thoughts. So I totally hear what you're saying. Like, I think the concept, I get it. It's all about making massive dynamics.
Yep.
And it is a great hymn for that. But what I would say, having heard a lot of hymns growing up performed by choirs of men, just singing with very little music, the amount of dynamics and emotional content you get from it in its original form is vastly superior to what ELP managed to do when they threw so much at it. I get what they were trying to do, and I am still impressed by that, but I think there's nothing better than the sound of
an actual choir.
I think there's something just so emotive about a wall of
actual voices.
And like having grown up watching like rugby and hearing people singing in that sort of realm. When you watch the England team playing against Wales, the one time where like the England fans will sing up to kind of try and meet the Welsh fans who are famous for singing their hearts out at the rugby match, it's this song. So I've heard it performed at like a kind of a literally fever pitch level.
It's quite loaded in a way, isn't it? Because it resonates with, like, even with me, I think probably that's got something to do with the English school system and also sporting events in England too. And I think everyone has their preconceptions. And for me, Jerusalem's a really haunting song. And so this was weird for me because they, for me, turned what was quite a sort of a powerful and haunted song into something like really weirdly triumphant and almost joyous. It was a strange flip up for me. So that was my predominant issue.
That there are basically thousands of other versions of this very famous hymn to compare to. Exactly. I mean, I was going to say, I think, like, as you say about the dynamics, I think their dynamics are between an 8 and an 11. Like, that's the only two switches on the knob they have. So I think there's that going on. Again, with the ELP kind of co-opting someone else's amazingness, because the lyrics to this song are incredible. Obviously, there's a whole history behind William Blake, but this is obviously a song about the changes in England that he saw because of the Industrial Revolution. So there's a lot of like rich imagery and stuff.
Oh, yeah, there's that line about the satanic mills and all that.
These dark satanic mills.
Painting this imagery of like the blot on the countryside that is the industrial city. And it's like you can see it, can't you? It's like that's the world's changing and him coming to terms with it. It's a fascinating.
We're looking at you, Huddersfield.
Poetry,
and I think that actually ties into what you were saying there, Rufus, about how it's a really haunting song that they just made awesome.
They've got like crashes and rolling drums and everything. I don't know how you would describe it really, but they bring a lot of energy to something that I kind of associate with sad and Christmas time.
Fabulous.
Well, you get this rousing hymn, and then we just crash the car into Toccata.
Yep. So we go on to Toccata. Toccata is a reworking of Piano Concerto No. 1 by Alberto Ginastera, an Argentinian composer. So this is the prog your mom warned you about. This is absolutely kind of a math rock type of thing. Having listened to the original song, I will say this version is surprisingly true to the original. The original is as shocking and atonal. Gotta be honest, for the most part, this is a skip it for me because it just kind of goes and goes and goes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like it's kind of contextless, where it's just a lot of instrumentalness.
Yeah.
But talented musicians. So that's all I have to say about this. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, were they contractually obligated to include arrangements of, well, I know it's not classical, but, or classical music?
Classical. Yeah.
Because this just
keeps happening.
Takes all the air out of the room. Like, it just slows down. I want to skip it. It's 7 minutes long.
So it's interesting because on the last album, Trilogy, they had the song Hoedown. Hoedown is a classical song, and it's 3 minutes long, and I'm engrossed. I love it. There's parts of this song where I'm like, okay, if you had just put a melody, and obviously it's not their song to do that with, but it's like they just needed a sweet melody like Hoedown. This one just, it tries the patience.
You know, I never skip anything. So I sat down and I enjoyed the parts. And I think, you know, like other parts, I think could be like separate concepts. And I think the way they're kind of put together isn't necessarily coherent. It starts off with what I could describe as like, you know, goblins on the warpath. And I think like that's quite, like it is kind of earwormy. And it's like, I know that piece of music, and it was that was the fun bit. Then you hear, you know, fun synth sounds, a bit dated, but I quite liked them, to be honest. I'd not heard them on a record before this time, so maybe that's the Apollo, I don't know.
Yeah.
My favourite part on this is that section in the middle with the timpani.
The timpani rock out.
It just sounds like a great studio. This is Olympic Studios. I've heard Eddie Kramer talking about how much he loved working there and you consider how much stuff's going on and how kind of clear it all is in the production. It is well produced. My only gripe is it's not enough drums. Not enough drums. But yeah, it's interesting. But it ends like it sounds like I can hear actual techno in this towards the end. There's a bit that sounds like a fire alarm in a spaceship, and then it goes into like what sounds like what I've heard like early 2000s techno just for a second, and then it's gone, and it's like, whoa, there's some, like if you could just extract some of these parts,
it could be fun.
You could there's some concepts here that are probably very interesting, but they've just kind of tried to put too much little bits
bubbles
into
over
one thing. Yeah. I think that kind of sums them up in the way I hear it. It's like
it's too much.
Many ways.
Yeah. Well, it's like a lot of what they do. I think if you could repeat it, you know, it would turn into something else. You know, like I feel like they're scared of repeating themselves.
But that's how you make a memorable song.
Exactly. You know, what's they say? Like, you know, repetition is the first step to mind control. You know, there's none of that. There is no mind control. They are not trying to brainwash the masses.
Just delight the senses.
Yeah.
So toccata is usually a rapid piano piece meant to show off skill, from the Italian word toccata for touch. And speaking of touch, still you turn me on. Oh, Greg. So we are at Greg's love song, Still You Turn Me On. I guess just like I felt with Lucky Man, and kind of like I felt with From the Beginning, I love how many little bits Greg chucked into what should be a pretty simple acoustic song. So I can hear like all of the harpsichords and wah pedals, and I love that he oscillates between plucking and wahing for the verses and the chorus. Like, I love that structure.
I really quite like the tone he's got when he does use the wah as well.
Yeah.
You know, it's love it or hate it sort of sound. If you get it right, it does sound good, and he really's got it right. There's something about the lyrics. It's just like, obviously, it's just, I don't know, it's a bit creepy and a little bit corny, and it's a shame, really, because I think actually a really good song. Yeah. It's just the lyrics are just lame.
There's this proximity thing he does, right? Like he's really wide and airy and reverby for the first minute or whatever. And then when he goes to say, you know, still you turn me on, he goes all like proximity and close to you. And it's like he's whispering in your ear.
Yeah,
like it's actually really like I like the song actually. I enjoy it a lot, but oh my god,
there's a little bit of that kind of that phase thing, isn't it? That Beatlesy sound, ever so slight there as well. I quite like that. There's lots of stuff I love about this song.
Yeah,
like it kind of gives me a bit of a Justin Hayward vibe as well, who I love.
No, I think this is just one of those things where it feels like a safe port. We've been at stormy seas, and now we're back in a safe port.
I mean, what a contrast, right? I mean, obviously, this is like them saying, look, we can do what everyone else is doing, but we choose not to.
Yeah. Dangling it in front of you.
Yeah. And, you know, I like it when they do it, so please do more.
Yeah.
But instead, they don't want to. That's fine.
Yeah, this to me is maybe the closest he ever gets to Lucky Man again.
Yeah.
But it's a weird addition, though. I mean, I'm sure this is going to be the theme for everyone, but it's just so unbalanced, jumping from him to classical music arrangement to romance to comedy song next, basically, and then kicking off the space opera. So it's just a lot. I think it's all right. I think I like it on its own. I just don't know if I like it on the album.
Well, that's the placement of this in the album is quite odd. Yes, it sits well after Toccata. I think that's quite good. But then the next song, if you're ready to talk about that, it's like, it just sounds, what's it doing? It's just such an assault of sonic stuff going on.
Yeah.
Now that you've told me, and I'm learning this live, listeners, that the hidden meaning of brain salad surgery, and now I hear this song, like, man, they were just very horny. Yeah. But if I was in the 70s and I had a sexy lady over and I put this on and I had the album cover haunting us, I'm sure she would tell me, like, turn this off. Like,
yeah.
When you get to Benny the Bouncer, and then like.
So I do not know why they do this to me, because I'm on, and then I'm back to half-mast because freaking Benny the Bouncer. And I mean, honestly, I'm
amazed you're still at half-mast with this thing going on.
I think I don't know why they do humor songs.
Yeah,
like this is a whoopsie doopsie.
I think they're not funny. End of story.
Yeah. There's a charm to, I'm thinking of Genesis. So like, Return of the Giant Hogweed, or I Know What I Like in Your Wardrobe. So Genesis has like these songs that have a humorous bent, but they're not just a funny little blast. And I think it's just like, come on.
Yeah, it's an unfair comparison, I think. I think this is them trying to be silly. And I don't feel like it comes natural.
Yeah,
they may be silly, but they're not entertaining me. They're not funny.
They're so serious. For the rest of it, it seems such a not even like a diversion, like a U-turn on what they're trying to do. So it just feels out of place for me, just completely out of place. Yeah.
No, and it messes the flow up a little bit.
Yeah.
I think there is one good example of what they were trying to do, which is on the previous album, The Sheriff.
Yeah.
But this is The Sheriff. I want it to be The Sheriff because I think that is my favorite ELP song. But yeah, I'm just frustrated by this one because it could be fun. I think ELP can be fun, but I just don't like it.
I mean, I think The Sheriff is fun because it's a normal song that's about a fun subject and gives Keith the time to do some like honky-tonk piano. This is just ragtime, I guess, shuffling along with a goofy voice. There's no need for it.
The voice kills me. I don't like it.
Yeah.
This is Peter Sinfield, right? Is
Yes.
this coming from him?
Yeah. And I was about to say, which makes me sad because I was so happy to hear that Peter Sinfield was back because he really made King Crimson sparkle.
Is this his only song? No, he did Carnival Die as well,
Carnival.
right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, yes. Are we ready?
We're ready.
So Carnival 9, the multi-parted, I guess, space opera, whatever you want to call it. And in fact, this is the most Prog move ever. They even split part 1 into parts. Maybe about an evil computer, maybe about, I don't know, the future somehow. Whatever it is, it paints pictures. And we'll talk about why the pictures are so good in but 1 second. But here we are, Carnival number 9. First impression, part 1. So I guess the first thing I'd kick off with is I think the complicated riffage does make it hard to grab onto as a song. Like there's, again, as we've been saying, so much in this bubbling pot. But honestly, I always forget how good the first part is. And if First Impression Part 2 wasn't the hit off of this album, I actually think this whole song would be at least a cult hit in the prog world.
I have a lot of mixed feelings about Carnival 9 because when it's great, and then there's other times I'm just bored, like in the second impression, but it's fun. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. Like, that's fun. I think the organs are fucking banging. I like the weird direction it goes with the battles with the computers, which might be very relevant for our time. Maybe they predicted ChatGPT.
So, Greg says that he predicted our times.
Oh, God.
He's like, when you actually think about it, we're actually quite ahead of our time. And I was like, I don't want to take that away from him, but I was going to say their like robot philosophy is just Keith with a sweet vocoder at the end saying, I am yourself. And Greg Lake singing back to him.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, this predates Terminator. Like, there was no Skynet before this, so maybe this is where James Cameron got it from.
I don't want to give them all of this, this amazing art. Yeah, so we're at Carnival 9, First Impression, Part 1. I think this first bit, I just always forget how good it is. And I think only because Part 2 drags and it's 34 minutes long, I don't think it's as memorable as Close to the Edge. But I think this had the chance of being one of the great long songs of prog.
And it might be for other people. In the same way we approach the reverence of like Dark Side of the Moon or Close to the Edge, there's probably like the bizarro version of this podcast where we're like, oh my God, guys, we're finally getting to Carnival 9, our favorite song.
Money just drags. I can't. Yeah, no, you're entirely right. There's got to be some huge Carnival 9 fans.
I mean, well, it's obviously longer than Close to the Edge, so that's obvious. But yeah. I think that's part of Yes's magic, is their 20-minute songs are all digestible.
Yeah, I think so. First Impression Part 1 starts pretty awesomely, but I don't think they hook you with a thing. And then it's funny, midway through, they do the bit we all know and love. Not quite Welcome Back, My Friends, to the Show That Never Ends, but they basically do that part, and that just like gets going. You're right, like it's just banging.
So, whilst doing this podcast, obviously, you'll say, Ed, listen to this album, and I'll go away and sit and listen to it. But I'm writing notes. Now, I wouldn't normally do that when I listen to music. So, I think this album, or this bit of the album, if you hadn't have said to me, listen to this for a podcast, I wouldn't be sat there writing notes. And because I was writing notes, I was like looking back over those notes. I said, oh yeah, they did this bit in this beginning bit, and they did this bit, and it's like there's so much going on that you would never remember it by the end of the song. Like the bits you wouldn't remember the bits you liked, because they cram so many parts into a song, and they seem to be scared of repeating themselves, as if they'd be looked down upon by their prog peers if they were to play the same section twice or something. This
God focus.
Yeah.
But when I look back at my notes, I was like, oh yeah, like it starts off with the piano and the bass. When Greg's playing bass and Emerson's on piano, those are my favourite bits that I ever hear when this band are playing together. They always put their parts in unison, and it sounds like they spend a lot of time working those sections out. They're always really crisply tight. And the way it's recorded as well, like the bass is quite trebly, so it sounds like someone plucking a piano string. Like it's really quite a cutting sound. And those are always my favourite bits. But they move on from them so fast that you kind of forget about them, So yeah, like it starts off like that, and it's really good. And then there's lots of changing time sequences. And I noticed that they seem to change the type of key sound every time there's a timing change, and I kind of like that too. Like you hear the Hammond, which is kind of my favourite sound of late 60s, 70s.
Of keyboards,
I love it. And, you hear that, you hear the Moog, is there like a clavinet in there as well? Like there's quite a lot in this song, but like I say, it's the time sequence changes. It's like the keyboard change with the drummer's shift in pace. And I think if you heard more of the drummer, then I think that would drive home a bit better.
Yeah.
So I feel like I really do like this, where they were heading with it, but I just kind of got lost in
the fuzz.
Yeah. I feel this is another example where Emerson goes a little too far. Now Greg Lake starts playing the guitar through the high watt stack. I'm like, hey, I'm listening now.
Yeah, it focuses it.
It really brings back the balance, and there's a section of guitar work at the end of this that is just awesome.
Yeah.
And I don't know why we don't hear more of it, because it's just good. It's just really good. And the way it's recorded is up there with some of the better examples of people who use this particular setup. I could forgive anyone for not still being checked in at this point after
everything that has preceded it.
Yeah, after the Benny the Bouncer, I can see why.
What a weird transition.
Yeah, I can forgive people for being a bit checked out at this point, but it's like this is some of the best stuff.
Yeah. Yep. It was waiting in front of your eyes the whole time.
This does feel like a treat for everyone who's managed to make it through.
Yeah, as I was going to say, I always forget how good the song is. I always do. Yeah, because it's been such a wild ride so far. Yeah, I actually find it to be almost a normal-ish song that, of course, they fill with nonsense again.
Yeah. But that's ELP. Yeah.
That's ELP, man.
Sorry, just a quick question. Was Carnival on its own side?
Because it's so long, they have the first 7 minutes on one side, then they flip over.
To do the rest of it.
Oh,
my God. Okay. So that was a natural
break.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Which is why we start off the second side of the album with First Impression Part 2. Welcome back, my friends, to the show that never ends. So, Greg says he thought this up because they were on a rehearsal stage, which they had purchased for the rehearsing of this album. And yeah, he said he felt like saying it. And it's just one of those lines that's just prog through and through. So we kick off side 2.
I mean, this is where it gets great. Easily, maybe top 5 ELP songs for me.
Yeah.
I think the best we hear Emerson ever on the organs. The lyrics are fun. I think it's a nice contrast from how the song ends. Soon the Gypsy Queen in a glaze of Vaseline. Like, that's... Oof.
Well, I was going to say, this is Peter Sinfield's magic, because he did In the Court of the Crimson King. So we met a bunch of fun characters there. Then we come to In the Wake of Poseidon, met a bunch of fun characters there. We hard skipped the middle of King Crimson's catalog, but he actually writes more fun kind of like impressions. And so I think this is a really nice way for it to go. You're right, he's got a way with imagery.
Sorry to go off on a tangent, but did Peter Sinfield do, outside of King Crimson, like, I know he's like their lyricist and a poet, but did he do much like published work?
I don't know.
Did he ever write like a novel or anything,
No, genuinely don't know.
Put some of these crazy ideas down in, more of a digestible format. It's going to be hard to make a living that way. Prog rock lyricist.
Well, no, so interestingly, it looks like he moved to the lyrics, like started becoming a lyricist for pop songs.
He at least did a couple songs for Celine Dion and Cher.
Yeah. And if the albums sell, you get the royalties. So where were we, Peter Sinfield?
Yeah, I can hear, like, my ears prick up in the part 1. It's like, why is he rhyming that with that? That doesn't sound like Greg Lake.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went off and was like, Peter's on there. That explains it.
What a fucking great song this one is. I mean, like, I don't know, great part, great impression, whatever you want to call it. It's sick.
Yeah.
I have to say, like, I think this is the one track where I do hear that sort of Who feel that you were talking about earlier, Ed. But I also, I still feel like they're like Steppenwolfy, and then this is where they kind of channel they're in a Steppenwolf soundscape. Not to say that they're any way similar musicians to Steppenwolf. That would be a weird comparison, but in soundscape, it calls back to it a lot.
You bang on with the Who reference, because it's like it starts with a step sequencer, which is how Baba O'Reilly starts.
Yeah.
And then when Greg starts singing, he uses a slightly bigger, growlier voice. And then when the guitar's playing, again, it's that high watt stack. It's like they've literally recreated their own version of Baba O'Reilly. That's something very different. Like, I'm not hearing like, they're ripping it off or anything like that. I mean, there's love there. There's Simple as that. There's love there.
Definitely a theme of rock at of the time as well. This sort of addressing the crowd, kind of breaking the fourth wall almost, and addressing the listener and putting on a show. So you can kind of see where they've drawn it from. Something I just wanted to kind of like draw back on is I think they put a lot of thought into this stuff, don't they? I mean, that sounds kind of silly. Something I think we all kind of associate Carnival with is the sound of the Hammond organ, right? And so, and then Welcome to the Show. It all fits into place. When you're listening to it at the time, you maybe don't have the opportunity to kind of put two and two together because there is so much information fired at you. But it's nice that they've gone to those sort of lengths to have this theme almost and work on that.
You're at the carnival. Yeah, no, I was going to say, I just love the device of taking you to a crazy future carnival, basically. So the other interesting thing, there was bits in here where I could hear video game music, obviously in addition to the kind of synthy soundscapes. And I was actually thinking about that. I think the Japanese composers of the old school Nintendo games and stuff, I think they took a lot of their cues from like jazz, like fusion jazz or jazz classical music or something.
For sure.
And so I actually think that that is the obvious through line that you can hear. And I've never actually looked this up. I would be willing to bet that they all liked, I mean, probably Emerson, Lake and Palmer straight up, but prog rock in general.
I remember like when we were doing, I think it was when we were doing Trilogy, I noticed like there was some stuff that I'd heard on Nintendo games specifically. I wonder if there's a guy on the Nintendo like game development team back in the day who was just well into ELP.
Ian, I've done the smallest Google search, and you know what? Ian's fucking nailed it on the head.
Is it?
This is uncanny how perfectly he's got this.
Oh boy.
So Koji Kondo, the guy who did Mario, basically drew most of his inspiration from 70s rock bands.
Oh, right. There you go.
And guess who is named? ELP.
ELP. There you go. I could smell it on him. I could sense the jazz rock.
That's uncanny.
So I guess my final thought about this type of song, because I've never heard a song like it again, gotta be honest, like it feels really unique. And I always think about Crosby, Stills, Nash, and not really Young, their vocal harmonies. And I always think about, like, you know how you never really heard it again? And I actually think it's these types of bands. The secret is that they make this complex stuff look easy. Like, I think if you were just some very, very talented musicians, I think you could try and fail to make Emerson, Lake and Palmer stuff. Just like if you were talented vocal harmonists, I think you could try but still fail to make Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young. You know, to actually do these types of things, it is a rare talent. That's why these guys are the best at this, like it or lump it. And I was like, hey, I've never heard this again.
It's very easy to listen to it and go, oh yeah, they're just jamming and making stuff up as they're going along. It's like there's no coherence to it, blah blah blah. It's like there's no way you could jam this stuff. You can't make it up as you're going along. This is all like
they're so tight with everything.
Yeah, everything's so on purpose. But because the parts are changing so quickly and you're not exposed to them long enough to really digest it, it's the sort of music that you listen to multiple times and you will hear bits you really like and you'll hear new bits and stuff. But yeah, on first listen, you don't stand a chance. You don't stand a chance to take any of it in. But yeah, part two, I think, is what I'd say is the most kind of commercially acceptable sounding bits.
Part two of First Impression.
Yeah.
Because we are about to enter the second impression. So the second impression is the extended keyboard section. So this song almost captured a certain hoedown energy, which I actually do enjoy in Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And there's this middle bit where Keith Emerson had obviously found this like flange piano sound and decided to solo on that for 3 minutes. And it was a demon that lived within me as a youth. And I know the feeling of wanting to solo when you find a cool sound effect.
Right.
And
nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. No, it's a curse.
I think it's the same urge that you get when you find that there's a gunshot sound on the keyboard, isn't it? and then you just say,
yeah, like, this is so cool.
yeah.
Yep. I'm not entirely sure what this has to do with an evil computer. This is
I quite like this second impression, so this is the bit. It starts with, it does that bass and piano thing again to begin with. It moves into the kind of like Cuban syncopated Latin rhythm thing that is awesome, and you never really hear it on this album again. And it's oh my god, incredible drums. It's like it's something I always think is missing from a lot of prog, that kind of shifting syncopated swinged rhythms. Everything's always too people do clever time signatures and stuff, but they're always straight. This has got some pulse to it that's exciting. Yeah, you start off with that piano element that's beautiful, and then this, and then it goes to like very like kind of thematic, like filmy score vibes. It reminded me of the Jeff Wayne's War of the Worlds, like after I think it's called Dawn of War, there's like this lull before the suffering, and it's quite bringing up emotions of sorrow and thoughtfulness, and they're just taking on a journey that I don't understand how you write that. What's the story they're telling there?
I mean, I think this is the unresolvable tension of ELP. I think they are a stadium band who wanted to tell these grand narratives with bombastic whatever, but they're also a ponderous jazz trio, and it's always in tension with each other. Like it is unresolvable, and I think that's the discomfort all three of you have been feeling with ELP. So,
do you think? I mean, the later albums much better than I. Do they ever decide what they want to be? Do they ever decide? Oh, we want to be a jazz trio, or really we want to be a stadium band? Yeah.
I was going to say the next album is Works, and that is, by their own admission, a bloated double album where they did too much and they did everything again with the giant piano concerto.
Yeah.
Some drum solos, and then some Greg Lake ballads. Like, they just did everything all over again massively. There are some gems. We will talk about them in the future. But, again, they continue to not really figure out what that thing is.
A kind of question that I think you can ask is, where would I expect myself to be listening to this, right? Am I in the car? Am I sitting on the sofa? Am I in front of a stage?
In a beach bar.
Am I in a beach bar? Am I in a basement? Am I fighting a robot computer in the future?
Yeah.
No. And I think, like your standard pop songs, and admittedly, stuff like Still You Turn Me On, you could listen to that in the car, you could listen to that in the kitchen, you could listen to that at a venue. But then the rest of this, like as you say, really is that sort of, that stadium feel. That stadium has that stadium gravitas to it. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that seems to be the only gravitas that it has, despite the fact that they are technically a prog rock / jazz trio, right? They don't have songs that are only smoky and quiet or just jazz in general, right? They seem to inject jazz into these stadium-esque songs. And I think that really limits where it's enjoyable to listen to these songs, because I think not only does it like they have a weird identity and they don't really know what they're trying to do, or they're just trying to impress you, whatever. Those points have already been raised, but even just boiling it down to, where am I listening to this? What position or feeling or mood do I need to be in to enjoy this?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah.
And I think it is just in the venue watching them on stage, because they have this to and fro between these different styles.
Yeah.
The only other place is somewhere safe. Like the whole sofa with headphones, so no one else in the house is disturbed by the madness.
It has such energy at times, though, right? Like especially this song, especially Second Impression.
But what do you do with that energy? You can't start dancing. You'll be lulled into something different.
More devious.
Yeah. 2 minutes later,
and then suddenly you'll get depressed.
But I feel like, genuinely though, I feel like every time I think of someone who listens to a band like ELP, where do they listen to? They're the headphone guys. the people who sit somewhere quiet and they contemplate it. It's interesting that happened in a stadium also. I can't put those two there's two people in the same world, it seems.
No, and I guess that's what Rufus is getting at. I think that flip between headphone music. I can't say there's any car music here.
No.
Definitely headphone music and then stadium music. And I think it just keeps flipping every 2 minutes between the two.
Yeah.
So, no, you're right. That's an interesting, I don't know what emotional space you'd ever feel comfortable just, writing it out in. So then we come to Carnival 9, third impression. And this is where it becomes the space opera we've been waiting for. And it's funny because then you look back and you're like, I don't know how the rest really built up to this. But this is now...
I had the same thought, actually.
Because I was in my mind, because the end is so awesome when it's Greg Lake fighting an evil computer, I was like, okay. And then I retrofitted the rest of the story onto that. And then I listening through again, I was like, wait a second. There's none of this built.
Oh, it's epic, even if it doesn't make any sense.
So Peter Sinfield is back. We'll talk about the subject matter in a second, but I guess there's something from what you're talking about that kind of haunts this song, because this is a 30-minute song. I think the bombasticness actually doesn't allow for the connective tissue that long songs take to really thread. So I said at the top, Jerusalem is my favorite ELP song because it's a 3-minute burst of just Greg singing. I think with this type of thing, I guess you're right, where you're going on a long journey, but it's a very confusing journey. In an emotional sense, it's a very confusing journey.
Yeah.
And part of the confusion, but a delightful part of the confusion, is what is Greg singing about?
Yeah, I think it's clearer in this bit than any other bit.
Yeah.
It starts off giving imagery of earlier on there was the Toccata had that kind of goblins on the warpath thing when that started, and when this one started, it was more like medieval knights on horseback, and they actually used the line silver-clad knights or something. I can't remember the actual line, and it's I was already there. Somehow they'd somehow already put me in that medieval knight.
They primed
thing.
you, yeah.
So I was there thinking, oh, that's what it's about, and some of the lyrics were teasing me down that path. But then it was oh no, these silver-clad soldiers or whatever were like some kind of robot thing. Then it goes all sci-fi, and it sounds sci-fi, and then they're doing the stuff with the Apollo Moog.
Yeah, it's a very metallic song,
making sci-fi noise, and it's oh right, okay. And then the lyrics, they talk about this battle between natural intelligence and artificial intelligence, and I think the robot wins. I'm not too sure. I kind of lose track.
Yeah.
in all the bleepy bloppy noises. When I was a kid, you guys might be too young to remember this, but when I was a kid, I can't remember what the bike was called, but there was a BMX you could get that had sound effects on it.
Fuck off, what?
And they were and you'd press these buttons and they'd be like... and it's these were the noises it was based on, this song. They're all in this song.
What an amazing thing. I'm going to have to Google this.
If anyone remembers this BMX, they can write in and tell me what it's called.
Like a soundboard?
I just remember it's just... Yeah, it had the soundboard. It was it was this black BMX, and it had all this plastic trim on it that would make it look more angular and spaceshipy. Yeah, early 90s stuff.
This is actually where I like the weird electronic sounds, danger.
Yeah.
There's definitely a different version of the song where I would hate it, but I don't know why this works for me, but some of their other weird experimentation doesn't.
No, I think because this is experimentation in the service of a story. And even if we don't understand the story, it's the computer, and he's bringing the computer to life sonically. It's almost like, I don't know if you ever listen to Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but kind of like the BBC radio play type of thing, where they've got all sorts of awesome old school BBC sound effects. And it's great. I actually do feel like I'm on the bridge of some Star Deck or something. I can see the whole thing. So, they bring it together.
Would you consider this a 2112 style, warning signs of the future in technology?
I guess so. I mean, I always wonder, what was the biggest movie of that year? I wonder this for a lot of them, where it was what was going on pop culturally that meant that this was on their mind. And maybe they had like read Asimov very recently or something like that. I know John Anderson did. So I don't know. Like, I don't know what was kind of in the zeitgeist in 1972.
Good question. We were joking about their influence, but the more I think about it, I feel like Neil Peart would have been heavily influenced by this kind of thing. Maybe we should give this some credit for being ahead of their time.
I mean, like, you've got Skynet, you got Rush. I'm going to give them Aliens. Like, why, just chuck it all in.
I mean, 73, right? This is pre-Star Wars.
Yep.
I mean, I feel like science fiction isn't even that popular. I'm looking at the top 20 movies from 1972, and I don't think there's a single science fiction or fantasy in here.
Because when's 2001: A Space Odyssey?
That's late 60s. So, Okay, you're right. I forgot about Space Odyssey. And then what's the one where you can't be old?
Running. It's like a
Running Man?
Cool Runnings.
Yes.
Logan's Run. Yep.
I think there might have been an evil computer in Logan's Run. Although it was also after this. Okay, wow.
ELP, you crafty devils. But yeah, no, I guess like the fact that 2001 was before this meant that was in the air. That the idea that a computer could turn on you.
All right, so Kubrick inspired ELP, and ELP inspired
the rest of the modern world. So fabulous. So that was ELP's Brain Salad Surgery. Literally the most important album ever made.
Well, here's a question. I would have loved to see Carnival 9 as a full album, actually.
Yeah, I'm actually with you on that.
Not that I would want to get rid of Jerusalem. Like, I'd love to see that somewhere else. But it would have been interesting to see them try to do the entire album.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point. So you start at the beginning with Greg Lake singing a patriotic anthem in resistance to the robots, so Jerusalem. Then you have Greg Lake fighting them in a drum battle with Takata. Well, and then you have Greg Lake falling in love with one of their chips or something.
There we go.
Still, you turn me on. And then... and then we remove Benny the Bouncer.
Yes.
Yeah, but actually I was like, I think I'd have felt more satisfied, and it might have kind of calmed them down and focused them a little bit if they were like, actually, we're going to do one concept.
Yeah, the theme would really benefit this whole album.
I like this.
Right to Carl Palmer and relitigate Brain Salad Surgery.
Brain Salad Surgery. That could be your next album.
What a spicy idea.
Spicy.
Yeah, I often think that people read into things a little too much and assume that people have got themes when that's kind of accidental. But in this case, I think a coherent theme is actually present all the way through. I think Brian might be right. Whether that's intentional or not, I don't know. It might just be the Geiger magic.
Yeah.
I've made this point before that, two Americans in a room, they'll think everything's got a concept to it.
Goddamn right.
Just reading into everything too much. But no, I think... But why not?
I mean, they all wrote it. They wrote it in a unified mental space. I'd say that's probably true.
Yeah, it's going to have a unified vibe, isn't it?
So I guess we're coming to some of the final points here. So I guess I'll start with this. So yes, this album is super dense. There are a lot of ideas, but I don't think the instruments and the vocals really trip over all that much. So as Ed said, the bass is kind of on the same wavelength as the piano, and that's true of the mix, but also I think you can really hear that the bass really plays these nice discrete notes. And with no guitar kind of clogging out the middle, the drums and the organ can go absolutely crazy, but they fill in both, obviously, the music, but also the rhythm. So they're not really clogged with the guitars. And then Greg's voice is so gosh darn powerful that it just fills out that central melody line.
Yeah.
And I think in this album, they don't trip over the keyboard solos as much. They really let the central solo just shine through. So I think, yep, very dense, but not too crowded. So I guess my final thought about Brain Salad Surgery. For me, this is Prog Rock's final mixtape. And I say that because it's got a ballin' anthem, It's got an 8-minute drum solo. It's got a stupid joke song. It's got a smooth ballad. And it's got a giant sci-fi space rock opera. And I think that's every type of song you could get in prog rock. And as I will always say about ELP, I respect the ambition and respect virtuosos. But I will concede we're now in the era of that crystal clarity of Dark Side of the Moon. And I think also the conceptual and sonic cohesion / clarity of Aqualung and Thick as a Brick and Close to the Edge. So I would appreciate how people could say this was too varied, too crazy. And I forget who called this album experience the Donkey Kong minecart ride, but I totally get that. So I guess my final point is that I think this is an album, if you like prog rock, you are absolutely destined to listen to as a teenager. And I think this is watching someone attempt like the quintuple axle or some crazy thing, not really even landing it, but it was just a thrill to watch them try. So that's my thoughts on Emerson, Lake and Palmer's Brain Salad Surgery.
I was never a big ELP guy like you were, Ian. So it's been good to revisit them for this podcast, and it has definitely made me remember some of my favorites.
Yeah.
But the good news is, unlike remembering Cat Food from King Crimson that I absolutely loathe, maybe my least favorite song in prog rock, all of their lows don't weigh on me. Like, I'm not like, oh my God. And in fact, I forget about them. Yeah.
No, and I was going to say, I think you are completely right in so much as revisiting ELP for this podcast. Even I was revisiting it because they fall off rotation probably the quickest. I guess my parting shot for ELP is, as I've said on probably all of these podcasts, I love that they take big swings. And they, as a concept, remind me of why I love prog rock. They go bigger, they go harder than any of the other bands. It's just that they really crash off the piano solo cliff quite a few times. But I think I've probably narrowed down my ELP to a greatest hits.
And that's interesting because I think almost all other prog rock bands I always approach by the album, but an ELP greatest hits. Yep. Maybe that is the way to consume them.
Yep. So I guess we'll leave the last word for Greg Lake. So Greg says, so in a band, you've got to have egos because that's what makes people want to shine. If you have people who don't care, the whole thing becomes wishy-washy. And when people care, they get opinionated. Even that's okay. But what really is a problem is when you put that volatile combination onto a Learjet for 6 years. I defy you to name one major band that hasn't gone through those internal pressures and conflicts. By and large, musicians aren't normal, balanced individuals. They're highly charged. And that was the case with Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
That's beautiful.
It's wonderful.
There you go. So, there you have it. That is Brain Salad Surgery. Do you have any other thoughts about this album?
I feel like my brain has had surgery.
My brain is a tossed salad.
Excellent. So, there you have it. That is Brain Salad Surgery. I have been your host, Ian Prize, and this has been a sort of young person's guide to prog rock. I want to thank my guests, Brian.
Thank you, Ian.
Rufus.
Thank you.
And Ed.
Thank you.
Find us on Instagram at ProgFrogPod. Or if you have longer thoughts, queries, questions, do email us at helloprogfrog@gmail.com. So Emerson, Lake and Palmer would go off to make one giant double album, Works, and then go back and do it again for Works Part 2. And then they made their contractual obligation album, Love Beach, and 2 more reunion albums in the 90s. But we're getting off the train here. But next time, knowing that one edge would not be enough, Yes decided to get close to 4 of them with Tales from Topographic Oceans. Join us for our dive into Yes's mid-70s career. We will see you next time. Honestly, Still You Turn Me On does actually sound like he's freaking a computer.
Yeah.